Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. And we are still plugging away at First Samuel up to chapter 20. Any opening comments from anybody here?
I think not in this chapter, maybe in the next one. I think is that the one where David's a thief? Is that the one where he's a little thief, a little rascal?
I'm excited for when he kisses Jonathan or whatever
No,
happens in there.
Yeah.
no. In 21, he actually goes to Achish. At least he tries to go to Achish, to Gath at least. But yeah, we'll get to that.
Oh, Mark, you missed a
Okay.
bit where they strip, though.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
There's boys stripping and kissing and being little rascals.
Yes, there is. The boys, but boys will be boys, and although it's a little awkward since he is married to his sister. I don't know. Very.
Oh,
It's not quite Lannisters, but it's getting a little in the family.
Okay.
Oh.
All right. So who's reading today?
I think Mark should.
Yeah, a returning guest, Mark.
Yeah.
Yes.
It'd be my pleasure.
Yes, he had a vacation this whole time, so he's got to get back to work. So
Penance.
Gotta pay my dues.
Yeah.
All right.
Read up to 23, including.
Okie doke. This is kind of a long chapter too, so.
Yes. So
Indeed.
that's why.
All right. I'll be reading from the net translation. My apologies. But it happens to be the one with the biggest font. So here we go. David fled from Naioth and Ramah. He came to Jonathan and asked, "What have I done? What is my offense? How have I sinned before your father? For he is seeking my life." Jonathan said to him, "By no means you're going to die. My father does nothing large or small without making me aware of it. Why would my father hide this matter from me? It just won't happen." Taking an oath, David again said, "Your father is very much aware of the fact that I found favor with you. And he has thought, don't let Jonathan know about this, or he will be upset. But as surely as the Lord lives and you live, there's about one step between me and death." Jonathan replied to David, "Tell me what I can do for you." And David said to Jonathan, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and I am certainly expected to join the king for a meal. You must send me away so I can hide in the field until the third evening from now. If your father happens to miss me, should you say, 'David urgently requested me to let him go to the city of Bethlehem, for there's an annual sacrifice there for his entire family.' If he should then say, 'That's fine,' then your servant is safe. But if he becomes very angry, be assured that he has decided to harm me. You must be loyal to your servant, for you've made a covenant with your servant in the Lord's name. If I am guilty, you yourself kill me. Why bother taking me to your father?" And Jonathan said, "Far be it from you to suggest this. If I were at all aware that my father had decided to harm you, wouldn't I tell you about it?" David said to Jonathan, "Who will tell me if your father answers you harshly?" Jonathan said to David, "Come on, let's go to the field." When the two of them had gone out into the field, Jonathan said to David, "The Lord God of Israel is my witness. I will feel out my father about this time the day after tomorrow. If he is favorably inclined toward David, will I not then send word to you and let you know? But if my father intends to do you harm, may the Lord do all this and more to Jonathan. If I don't let you know and send word to you so you can go safely on your way, may the Lord be with you as he was with my father. While I'm still alive, extend to me the loyalty of the Lord, or else I will die. Don't ever cut off your loyalty to my family, not even if the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." and call David's enemies to account. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David. Jonathan once again took an oath with David because he loved him. In fact, Jonathan loved him as much as he did his own life. Jonathan said to him, "Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed, for your seat will be empty. On the third day, you should go down quickly and come to the place where you hid yourself the day this all started. Stay near the stone Ezel. I will shoot 3 arrows near it, as though I were shooting on a target. When I send a boy after them, I will say, 'Go find the arrows.' If I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are on this side of you, get them, then come back. For as surely as the Lord lives, you will be safe and there will be no problem. But if I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are on the other side of you, get away. For in that case, the Lord has sent you away.' With regard to the matter that you and I discussed, the Lord is the witness between us forever."
So one of the first things that I thought was quite funny was the fact that, so David just spent, I'm sure, what was a decent amount of time fleeing after Saul tried to kill him twice. And now he's like, "Oh man, I gotta have dinner with the guy tomorrow."
Yeah, it's interesting how, like, obviously these stories are at the very least, at the minimum, not told in order, because there's no way Jonathan wouldn't have noticed.
So
What?
Liv,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
sounds like you're kind of underwater.
Yeah, she
Okay,
does.
hang on.
Yeah.
And
But
the
yeah,
guy's going to go hide in a field for 3 days.
I think
So-
they
so-
do something similar in the King's narratives. Not exactly the hide in the field thing, but the thing about there was something about arrows, like where they
Yeah.
shot arrows. I forget where what it was about, but there's something that's like, I don't know. It feels familiar. It feels like it's like I saw it in the like I read also in the King's narratives. Like is it in the Elijah or Elisha cycle? It might be.
Guys, can you hear me better now?
It is not.
Oh,
Yeah. I like the idea that, hey, you go hide in the field and I'll lob arrows at you.
slight problem there.
Yeah,
Um,
so religious people like to deny. They'll be like, "Oh, David and Jonathan, they weren't boyfriends," but like actually they're kind of right, because if you read this chapter, like they made a covenant with each other. They were married.
Oh yeah, good for them.
I hate you. So
Over and over and over again.
okay, so I think I should start the commentary. First on verse 1, Tsumura comments, "Some scholars think that the present episode is chronologically out of order, for, as Klein explains, quote, it hardly is likely that David would still need to determine if Saul's intentions toward him were hostile, nor is it likely that David would be an expected or welcome guest at the king's new moon celebration," end quote. Hence, the present story is placed directly after the story of the spear, in 19 verses 1 through 10. This order is seemingly supported by Jonathan's ignorance of what had happened. McCarter places the present event after David's escape from his house through windows, 1912. However, Paulson argues, if we take note of Jonathan's straightforwardness in speech and act, together with his naive ignorance in verses 2, 9, and 16, David's intriguing complexity and subterfuge in verses 3, 6 through 8, and Saul's obliviousness of past events, for example in verse 26, it is possible to expect a kind of narrative continuity and cohesion in the present story. Nevertheless, Paulson's idea would not solve the chronological problem, quote-unquote, that is, the relation between the present incident and those in the previous chapters.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that so many scholars have tried to reconstruct the different sources, is because there's obviously something wrong if we read the text straight through. Things just don't make sense. You can put in the same way that you could do with the flood narrative, you could split this in ways that would make more sense separately.
Mhm.
So it would explain especially the doublets, right? It would explain the doublets. It would explain why like, okay, yeah, sure, he's going for he's like, oh man, I gotta go have dinner with this guy again. Like, yeah, sure, it's for like a festival, but like you just spent some time fleeing. You could just like not, like, yeah, as Thor mentioned, you don't have, David, you don't have to wonder how he feels about you.
He's already thrown a spear at your head twice.
Abundantly clear.
Abundantly clear. And the idea that like Jonathan doesn't know, and I get clueless older brothers to a degree, but the idea that Jonathan doesn't know that Michael like snuck him out a back window, hid, bolsters in the bed. Is that your cat, Aaron?
No,
That's the
Oddly
parrot.
enough, the thing I'm petting is my cat. The thing you're hearing is the parrot.
That's hilarious.
That is hilarious. The parrot is annoyed that the
That's
cat
really
is getting
funny.
attention. That's adorable.
Parrots are
But yeah,
great.
the continuity is just very messed up. But it's interesting because obviously they seem to be folding in all kinds of different stories from different areas, and like there's a he's in favor and then he's out of favor and he has to be snuck out or warned off by a member of Saul's family. But this takes so many different forms and then repeats in so many different varieties that it comes off as really schizophrenic, which you could partially blame on Saul being nuts because evil spirit from God is evil.
Absolutely, that's it. That's the evil spirit. Yeah.
But that doesn't explain why Jonathan is such a dumbass. I mean, is he that much of a himbo that he wouldn't notice his dad throwing a spear at his best friend's head?
Yeah, there's a quote from a friend of mine from high school. How many times do two people have to break up before they realize it doesn't work?
Well,
also think it's-
Of course, that was said to me because I was making a lot of dating mistakes in high school.
I also
we all
think
have
it's
that
pretty.
one.
I also think it's pretty crazy how what Jonathan concludes from after Saul's, try to kill him was, oh, that must mean that he surely is after David. Like, should you have concluded that maybe your dad is crazy? It's just...
I know. Saul defaults to chucking spears at people's heads way too often to be consistent with good mental health.
Also, what we read is like a second example of Jonathan having this very like simple type of divination where he's like, oh, I'm going to ask a person a question, and if I get, and there's two optional answers, and if I get this answer, God wants me to do this, and if it's the other option, then God doesn't want me to do it. And it's like, just like when he attacked by himself the Philistines,
The
whatever,
garrison,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, if you come
Why
up
can't
to us,
God just
that's
say
a
so?
sign. That's a sign, right? If they answer one of two answers, that's a sign from God.
Oh
And
my
it's
God,
like-
Jonathan is a himbo. He is the himboiest himbo that ever happened. To be a himbo, you must meet the three ancient criteria. Be thick of thigh. You're not taking out a garrison if you're not strong. Be dumb of ass, which is obvious. And be pure of heart. Because Dopey Mick, I love you forever, is definitely pure of heart.
Yeah, that works.
Got a comment. This is Matt White, says, Aaron, of course Christians believe reading a book can make you gay. They believe reading this book will make you Christian.
Now on verse 3, there is only a step between me and death. Hebrew Bible reads, Ki kafesa beini veben hamavet. The word fesa is a hapax, but according to Driver, a verbal form of the root appears in Isaiah 27:4, efsa'ah. Most early translations render step. Traditional commentators take the step to be the literal step that saved David from Saul's spear. The Septuagint, or at least Vaticanus, reads, because I have said he is sated. McCarter writes that this reading is more intelligible, reflecting ki kasher amarti nisba. He writes, however, that the last word can be read instead as nishba, he has sworn an oath. The Lucianic recension omits kasher amarti, because I have said, which McCarter takes as an expansion. Tsumura, however, writes that McCarter's emendation is highly speculative, with the Masoretic text being well established textually. Likewise, all other modern commentators favor the Masoretic text. On verse 5, New Moon Feast, Klein comments, David decided to miss the king's observance of the new moon. Special offerings or meals were appointed for that day. Compare Numbers 28 verses 11 through 15, Ezra 3:5, Nehemiah 10:34, which is 33 in the Old Testament, and the Prince of the Coming Age, according to Ezekiel, would actually provide the offerings for it in 45:17 and 46:6 through 7. In the 8th century BCE, Israel commerce ceased on this day, as we see in Amos 8:5, 2 Kings 4:23, and Isaiah 1:13 through 14. It is not clear why David would have been expected to eat with the king, the general Abner, and Saul's oldest son, Jonathan. Herzberg speculated that this came with his role as son-in-law. Perhaps it had something to do with his general prestige, 18 verses 6 through 8, or with his role as the king's weapon bearer, 1621. On verse 8, show kindness to your servant. Hebrew for kindness is chesed. The word also appears in 15:6, meaning fidelity to an agreement, according to McCarter, or an act of kindness done out of loyalty for the covenant, according to Bar-Efrat. Klein notes that this loyalty, quote-unquote, is fulfilled in 2 Samuel 9, where Meribal or Mephibosheth is added to David's court and given the land which belonged to his father. On verses 12 through 17, several commentators take these verses as a later addition, since they interrupt the flow of the narrative. Klein writes that this is a Deuteronomistic addition, whose purpose is to, quote, form a bridge between HDR, i.e. the history of David's rise, 1 Samuel 16:14 to 2 Samuel 5:10, and the succession narrative, two early documents incorporated into Samuel, end quote. Auld notes that verses 12 through 17 are particularly complex, quote-unquote, filled with grammatical and textual difficulties, especially in verses 13 and 16. On verse 13, may the Lord deal with Jonathan. Klein notes Viola's opinion that the use of the name Jonathan instead of the pronoun me is a peculiarity of the redactor's style, as we see in 1 Samuel 25:22 and 2 Samuel 3:9. Tsumura writes that Jonathan uses the third person in order to distance himself psychologically from the curse. On verse 15, Bar-Efrat writes that a king from a new dynasty would often kill the offsprings of the previous king, so that they won't be able to overthrow him, as is the case with Baasha against Jeroboam in 1 Kings 15:29, Zimri against Baasha in 16:11, and Yehu against Achab in 2 Kings 10:11. Thus, Jonathan asks David to, quote, not ever cut off your kindness from my family, end quote, i.e., do not end your kindness towards my descendants and do not kill them. On verse 17, McCarter notes Thompson's suggestion that the use of the verb ahav, love, is deliberately ambiguous, pointing at once to the personal aspect of their relationship and at another level to a political aspect at the same time. This means that Jonathan hints of a political loyalty to David. Tsumura, however, writes that Jonathan's love, quote-unquote, is of a personal nature than a political loyalty, quote-unquote. He quotes from Baldwin, quote, genuine love, person to person, sealed by a covenant, such as there was between David and Jonathan, provides a most telling model of an unbreakable relationship, end quote. On verse 19, the day after tomorrow toward evening, Hebrew Bible reads veshilashta, which reads like a verb from the root shin lamed shin, to do a third time. Traditional commentators understood the verb to mean you shall be hidden for 3 days. Septuagint also takes veshilashta as a verb, you shall do it 3 times. Many modern commentators like McCarter, Klein, and Bar-Efrat suggest reading veshalashta as vashalishit, and a third, i.e. on the 3rd day of the festival. McCarter and Tsumura, however, writes that the new moon... Tsumura, however, writes that the new moon festival seems to have lasted no longer than 2 nights, suggesting instead, you shall wait 3 days, as the traditionals render. On the stone ezel, in Hebrew, ha'even ha'azel, the word azel is a hapax, and its exact meaning is unclear. Targum reads, the stone of the sign, linking Hebrew azal with the Aramaic azal, to go, which is subsequently rendered by a participle of the Aramaic verb ata, to come. Rashi takes azal to mean travelers, and so, quote, a stone which was a landmark for travelers, end quote. Septuagint, or the Vaticanus, reads, by that ergab, reading etzel ha'argaz halaz. This reading is favored by McCarter and Klein, but Tsumura writes that Ezel could be a Canaanite divine name that is preserved in a geographical name. Auld writes that ergab may be a slip from the Alexandrian that says ergon, which recalls ergasime in the previous clause. And finally, verse 20, I will shoot 3 arrows. Hebrew for 3 arrows is shloshet hachitzim. McCarter writes that Jonathan has no reason to mention 3 arrows at this point, and in fact no such number is mentioned in verses 35 forward. He notes that the Septuagint reads, and I will shoot 3 times, reading the verb shalash. Although Wellhausen took the Septuagint's vorlage as I shall shoot on the 3rd day, McCarter wrote that it is difficult to see how the verb shalash could mean do something on the 3rd day. Thus, as in verse 19, he takes shloshet as hashlishit, on the 3rd day. Tsumura follows Driver's explanation that 3 is a typological number, representing a small number of arrows, and quote, while a single shot would be suspiciously like a signal, 2 or 3 would give the impression of shooting practice, end quote.
It would
That's
also give him an excuse to say, come, no, there's another one closer or farther from you when he gets the first arrow, so.
That's it for my commentary on this part.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Hold on,
that was quick.
I think I'm gonna check this to make sure this is what I'm thinking of. But the whole thing about the arrows, is it from 2 Kings 13? Looks like 2 Kings 13. Because I knew it was from somewhere. I recognized this motif from a different part of the Deuteronomistic history. So it's in the 13:18. It looks like it was the verse that popped up.
Yeah, 15 and 18. But 18 reads, he said, now pick up the arrows, and he picked them up. Strike the ground, he said to the king of Israel, and he struck 3 times and stopped.
Okay, so yeah, no
Yeah,
wonder this
that's-
thing sounded familiar. Yeah,
That's a little different, though.
not quite the same, but it sounded familiar. So like there's okay, so that's what I was thinking. of.
Divination and arrows, but
Yeah.
in this case, he's hitting the ground with them in some weird ritual that has not been explained to him.
Yeah, Bar-Efrat also notes that the arrows are sometimes used for divination. And I think he quotes from this passage, but I'm not so sure.
That would make sense because those are the honestly the only 2 times I remember happening at all.
Okay.
It's funny, that kind of divination, too, which you brought up, Isaac, right?
Oh,
gone.
you sound underwater again.
Oh, God. Okay, I don't know. I may need to replace this microphone.
I think maybe it's just if you're closer to the mic, it seems to be.
Yeah, you may have to have it too far away because then the noise canceling
gate
kicks
turning
in.
off, yeah.
Well, now you're muted, so other.
Thing.
Yes, no.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we
it's-
hear you, but yeah, it's still the same issue.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not the mic. Okay.
Not sure what that is.
Okay, I think we should continue.
Sure.
Yeah, please finish the chapter.
All right. So David hid in the field. When the new moon came, the king sat down to eat his meal. Then the king sat down in his usual place by the wall, with Jonathan opposite him and Abner at his side. But David's place was vacant. However, Saul said nothing about it that day, for he thought, something has happened to make him ceremonially unclean. Yes, he must be unclean. But the next morning, the 2nd day of the new moon, David's place was still vacant. So Saul said to his son Jonathan, why has Jesse's son not come to the meal yesterday or today?
Because you
No.
threw a spear at his head.
Jonathan replied to Saul, David urgently requested that he be allowed to go to Bethlehem. He said, permit me to go, for we're having a family sacrifice in the city, and my brother urged me to be there. So now, if I found favor with you, let me go see my brothers. For that reason, he has not come to the king's table, said Jonathan. Saul became angry with Jonathan and said, "You stupid traitor. Don't I realize that to your own disgrace and to the disgrace of your mother's nakedness, you've chosen this son of Jesse? For as long as this son of Jesse is alive on the earth, you and your kingdom will not be established. Now send some men and bring him to me, for he is as good as dead." Jonathan responded to his father Saul, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" Then Saul threw his spear at Jonathan in order to strike him down. So Jonathan was convinced that his father had decided to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table and raged. He did not eat any food on that second day of the new moon, for he was upset that his father had humiliated David. The next morning, Jonathan, along with a young servant, went out to the field to meet David. He said to his servant, "Run, find the arrows that I am about to shoot." As the servant ran, Jonathan shot the arrow beyond him. When the servant came to the place where Jonathan had shot the arrow, Jonathan called out to the servant, "Isn't the arrow further beyond you?" Jonathan called out to the servant, "Hurry, go faster, don't delay." Jonathan's servant retrieved the arrow and came back to his master. Now the servant did not understand any of this. Only Jonathan and David knew what was going on. Then Jonathan gave his equipment to the servant who was with him. He said to him, "Go, take these things back to the city." When the servant had left, David got up from beside the mound, knelt with his face on the ground, and bowed 3 times. Then they kissed each other, and they both wept, especially David. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for the two of us have sworn together in the name of Yahweh, saying, 'The Lord will be between me and between my descendants on your descendants forever.'"
Oh, is that where?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Oh wait, is there
There's
one
another
more
verse.
Oh,
or
yeah,
another part of it. At least in the NRSVU.
Isn't it?
yes.
Then David
Says-
left and Jonathan went back to town.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
It's
not
just
in the
kinda-
Masoretic text.
But
Oh, yeah,
it-
so it
well,
looks like
that-
this.
it is.
Oh, this
but
census is in
it's the next
21:1 in
chapter.
Hebrew. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
it's yeah. That's
All right.
kind of
Fair enough. Yeah, that
Wait.
happens from time to time.
yeah. It does.
So yeah, there's so this is how you just write a good love story. I mean, Jonathan is going against the wishes of his father to save his roommate. So you know, good for them. Good for them. I hope they find happiness soon.
In another life, yes.
Yeah, this is very Romeo and Juliet.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Jonathan and David are both lucky that Saul is basically a stormtrooper.
That's true.
Well, you wonder how hard he was trying to hit Jonathan. Like, obviously he was pissed, but the whole idea of, you are my son and heir, and you will never be king if David becomes king instead. So I'm going to kill you because you annoyed me. And then that doesn't, I'm sorry. Stop applying logic to crazy people in the Bible. Stop applying logic to crazy people in the Bible. But seriously, the drama.
He even goes so far as he calls him the son of a rebellious woman.
Yeah.
Hey, insults his mother.
So did we ever even learn who Jonathan's mother was?
No. Women are only there to their children.
The text in SBL says that he's calling him genetically disloyal, which is certainly a phrase. So,
I mean, the Hebrew.
The JPS says
Yeah.
son of a perverse, rebellious woman.
Yeah, all English translations, this is from Alter, all English translations have treated the last Hebrew term here, mardut, as rebellion, deriving it from the root, it's MRD, but it's supposed to be,
Mem Reish Daled.
yes, thank you, to rebel. But this form, with the ut suffix of abstraction, would be anomalous in the Hebrew, whereas the vocalization in the received text yields a Hebrew word well known in rabbinic Hebrew and meaning discipline. She is, quote, perverse against discipline, hence wayward in this translation. Okay. Well, either way, that's not like that's not a far stretch from rebellious, wayward.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, it is really interesting that he's like calling out his mom. I feel like there would be no need for that unless the maybe it was like an editor or something, but unless there was like some tradition about Jonathan's mom that we just don't have access to.
I don't know. Like that just seems a way of insulting him by it's literally a your mama joke.
It is.
Although
it
that's
is.
also his wife, and
Is
but
it though?
seriously, Jonathan is, I don't know how many wives Saul had. It doesn't say, but that is his firstborn. Jonathan is his firstborn son and heir, and obviously a very courageous warrior and whatnot. So someone who could have reasonably, had the respect of the people from all that. So just attacking his mother like that just seems like very tantrum.
Well, I mean, he's still attacking Jonathan, right?
Yes,
By
by insulting his mother.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, it shows you the culture of the time, really, is what it does.
So Russia actually has a little backstory here, and he claims that this where we had the whole thing where the Benjamites were almost destroyed, and then they were like, "Oh, which city didn't join us? Oh, the Shiloh. Okay, so we're gonna kill the men there, and then you can take the women, and then the surviving Benjamites can marry the So the men of Benjamin grabbed the girls of Shiloh who came out to dance in the vineyards in Judges 21, and Saul, he was shy and he didn't want to grab any of the girls, but this one came by herself and she behaved instantly and pursued him.
Sure, Jan.
Well, I didn't include this, but Tsumura takes the son in this phrase to denote a member of a special class of people, and he quotes from McCarter, who forsake those to whom they properly owe allegiance.
Oh, okay. So rather than the son of a woman who is, it's just an expression meaning one who is part of a group who is. Yeah.
But there is like the nakedness as well, elva.
That's
which afterwards,
that's
which
more
also
literal,
is which also is like there is a an element of shame there. So I'll start on my commentary first on verse 26, ceremonially unclean. Since this was a ritualistic feast, Saul assumes that David was ceremonially unclean. Bar-Efrat notes that according to Leviticus and Numbers, a man can turn unclean for various reasons, such as excretions from the genitals, touching a corpse, skin lesions, etc. Some traditional commentators expounded on this impurity, quote-unquote. Rashi, for instance, writes, he has not yet immersed himself for his discharge of semen. And Gersonides writes, David did not prevent himself from using his bed, i.e. having sex, for he was naturally inclined to the multitudes of intercourse.
Yep, that's a phrase I use in bed a lot. Would you like to engage in the multitudes of intercourse?
Yeah.
He ain't got the love hound dog.
And then they leave.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've pointed out several times, Tamara and Isaac, that ceremonial cleanliness is something you kind of come in and out of, and sometimes it's not always under your control, and there's a lot of wait until evening, wash yourself, and then you're fine. Variations of ceremonial uncleanliness, which would, obviously, we shouldn't prevent you from taking a normal meal, but might prevent you from being at a potentially religious celebration at the king's table. So, but the sort of vulgar assumption of what kind of uncleanliness it might have been is it's a little creepy and vulgar. And
yeah. On verse 27 through 29, Auld comments, Saul's question to Jonathan appears very formally posed, and it elicits the full response suggested by David, but restated in Jonathan's own terms. One of the smaller changes in wording may be significant. From mimeni in verse 6 has become me'imadi in verse 28, which is used only once in the Hebrew Bible. Saul himself has heard this more weighty option on that one previous occasion, as he was receiving instructions from Samuel in 10:2. Is the change in wording a small linguistic token of Jonathan's claiming authority to grant David's leave of absence? Jonathan's fuller explanation to his father in verse 29 about the clash of pressing obligations faced by David is neatly framed by a wordplay that encapsulates the whole. The first word is shalcheni, dispatch me, and the final phrase is shulchan hamelech, the king's table.
It's actually interesting because David's request to go to his father's house for a family, it's based on the idea of filial piety, loyalty to your family and whoever the head of your family is to ask you to come and join in whatever family related rituals and ceremonies periodically. And it's that Saul accuses his son of violating familial duty. Filial piety and duty.
On verse 30, son of a perverse and rebellious woman. In Hebrew, ben na'avat hamardut. The exact meaning of this phrase is unclear. Rashi derived na'ava from the root nun vav ayin, to move, i.e., quote, an expression of straying and wandering, a gadding woman, end quote. Kimchi derived the word from ayin vav he, which Bar-Efrat takes to mean to bend or to stray off the path, according to Proverbs 12:8 and 2 Samuel 7:14. The Septuagint and 4Q Samuel B read na'arat, maiden or girl. This reading is favored by McCarter and Klein, with the latter adding that Saul takes Jonathan's friendship with David to be as embarrassing as it was to the nakedness or genitals of his mother. Other suggestions include Vulgate, which reads, son of a woman that is the ravisher of a man. Peshitta reads, son of a headstrong woman. And Targum, son of a perverse and strongly rebellious woman.
Yeah, you can tell that the Targum was later because it combines the two readings. That's quite funny to me.
Yeah. On verses 32 to 33, Auld comments, even if being called son of death by the king was not a formal sentence of death, Jonathan knows what send and take him to me implies. He asks on what grounds David should be put to death, apparently quite determinedly unaware that his father had just stated them. Without attributing it to David, he relays to his father David's characteristic innocent question, what has he done? Saul's assault becomes physical. Now that he has himself become target of his father's spear, Jonathan appreciates that David's understanding of the situation is well-founded. On verse 34, Jonathan got up. Hebrew, it's vayakom Yehonatan. The verb yakom, from the root kuf vav mem, means to get up, and is attested by the Vulgate, Peshitta, and Targum. 4Q Samuel B reads vayifchaz, sprang up, a reading reflected by the Septuagint. McCarter prefers 4Q Samuel B as the more difficult reading. He writes that the root pei chet zayin carries a connotation of impudence or arrogance, and so the Masoretic text replaces the rarer and graphic vayivchaz to the more familiar vayakom. Yeah, that's a very odd word change, right? I mean, it's not really apparent if that's not doesn't look like a scribal error to me.
Yeah, but also it doesn't seem like, oh, let's change the word because it makes Jonathan look like rude to his father. Like, who cares? Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, verses 40 to 42, McCarter writes that these verses are a further expansion from the author of verses 11 through 17 and 23, which he ascribes to the Deuteronomistic historian, renewing the theme of David's pledge to Jonathan and his descendants. Klein notes that Veyola also agrees with McCarter, seeing verses 40 to 42 as, quote, an addition to the original account, since the whole point of verses 18 through 23 is that such a personal meeting between Jonathan and David would be impossible, end quote. But in contrast to McCarter, Viola argued that verses 40 to 42 were added prior to the Deuteronomistic redaction. That's it for my commentary.
Okay.
Also, no Christian commentaries on this. Yeah.
No.
Interesting.
Oh wait, hold on.
I-
Maybe we can make some up.
They were too busy.
Jonathan represents the Jews who recognized Christ's true nature and protected the Christians from the wrath of the evil Saul, meaning the Sanhedrin.
Well,
How's that?
somebody
Oh, that's
drew
pretty
a
good, that's pretty good.
picture. Somebody drew a picture of a man's torso on the wall, and Saul kept lobbing his spear at its abdomen in prophecy of Jesus being impaled by the spear on the cross.
Yes, there we go.
Very
And that's
good.
why
Very
he
good.
kept missing his son, Jonathan and David, because he was actually hitting Jesus.
Yeah, as the king, he would.
He was
prophetically
spiritually
prophesy.
hitting Jesus. Okay, that's very good.
Time warp again.
Yeah, whenever it doesn't happen really, it happens spiritually.
David precludes Saint Sebastian. It was
Hmm.
being impaled.
All right, so are we now ready to move on to 21?
Yes.
Yes. Although I was wondering, when was the last time? Do you guys remember the last time Isaac read? Because I don't.
I don't either.
I normally don't offer myself up for the slaughterhouse, but I'll do it this time then. All right, so chapter 21, JPS. David then went his way, and Jonathan returned to the town. David went to the priest Ahimelech at Nov. Ahimelech came out in alarm to meet David, and he said to him, "Why are you alone, and no one with you?" David answered the priest Ahimelech, "The king has ordered me on a mission, and he said to me, 'No one must know anything about the mission on which I am sending you, and for which I have given you orders. So I have directed my young men to such and such a place. Now then, what have you got on hand? Any loaves of bread? Let me have them, or whatever is available." The priest answered David, "I have no ordinary bread on hand. There is only consecrated bread, provided the young men have kept away from women." In reply to the priest, David said, "I assure you that women have been kept from us, as always. Whenever I went on a mission, even if the journey was a common one, the vessels of the young men were consecrated. All the more then may consecrated food be put into their vessels today." So the priest gave him consecrated bread, because there was none there except the bread of display, which had been removed from the presence of the Lord, to replace by warm bread as soon as it was taken away. Now one of Saul's officials was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg the Edomite, Saul's chief herdsman. David said to Ahimelech, "Haven't you got a spear or sword on hand? I didn't take my sword or any of my weapons with me, because the king's mission was urgent." The priest said, "There is the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you slew in the valley of Elah. It is over there, wrapped in a cloth, behind the ephod. If you want to take that one, take it, for there is none here but that one." David replied, "There is none like it. Give it to me." That day David continued on his flight from Saul, and he came to King Achish of Gath. The courtiers of Achish said to him, "Why, that's David, king of the land. That's the one of whom they sing as they dance. Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands." These words worried David, and he became very much afraid of King Achish of Gath. So he concealed his good sense from them. He feigned madness for their benefit. He scratched marks on the doors of the gate and let his saliva run down his beard. And Achish said to his courtiers, "You see, the man is raving. Why bring him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow to rave for me? Should this fellow enter my house?" And that's the end of the chapter.
Yeah. Very interesting decision for David to go to Gath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Considering
With Goliath's
odd.
where
sword.
Goliath was from.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, very strange set of stories.
Yes, indeed, it is. It really is.
I
So
mean, I have greater.
David collects Goliath's sword,
Yeah.
which I imagine would probably be a very impressive weapon.
And
And
heavy.
then he wanders around drooling on himself.
Yeah. Well, it's, I mean, I'm more impressed with the whole, oh, I'm on a secret mission, and the gall he has to take the consecrated bread. Because remember, he's the man after God's own heart, and he's willing to take the consecrated bread for him and his men, who there aren't any, they aren't there. It's it's the cover story. Oh yes, I've sent my men on ahead. It's very urgent, terrible spy thing. Ooh, uh, and yet he picks up what I have to assume is a ridiculously large sword, not really well suited for spy missions. I don't know. Do rogues normally carry the giant two-handed weapons? I didn't think, but whatever. And yeah, and then what happens, these poor priests afterwards, is disturbing to say the least.
I mean, it really, like, just keeping up with the narrative itself, it moves so quickly. Because it goes from like these from like the holy bread, right? And then it immediately goes into like the spear of let's talk about the spear of Goliath. And then it's like, oh, and he fled to Gath next. Why would he flee to Gath? And
of all places,
when he gets there, he just acts insane, and then in the very next chapter he leaves.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I mean, he fakes insanity, and I've read many a Christian legend or tale about someone who, maybe a missionary who escaped persecution by doing what David did and acting like an idiot. And then people are just like, oh, he's just crazy. Okay, never mind, send him away. And, I don't know. It's
Americans
one of
are very
those.
good at that.
Yeah, it's one of those tales that, like, Brother Andrew, God's smuggler, would tell about himself,
He's
smuggling Bibles.
He's like if we're like in the context of the narrative, he chooses to go to Gath.
It's the last place Saul would look for him, I guess.
I mean, I have some reasonings from commentaries, but we'll get to that.
I'm sure there are some reasonings.
Was it the only place that wasn't controlled by Saul that he had to like at least go through to get somewhere else? I don't know.
Relatively close.
But like,
yeah, it is relatively close.
Yeah, but the issue is, right, he goes there, and then it's he's trying to like because with this whole acting crazy thing, right? Usually, like I could see someone doing that, like if they were just like taken captive or something, and like that's a situation you don't choose to put yourself in. He specifically went there and acted crazy, like he was trying to get out of a situation someone else put him in.
He would have had to have been trapped for that to make any sense. It would have to be that if we go to the Earth Nation, they'll kill us. But if we go to the Fire Nation, we have to deal with Azula. Earth Nation it is. Kind of a, like airbender moment. Like it just, you'd have to be in a there's no other option situation. And nothing in the text justifies that. Although
it's like he assumed that if he went there, no one would recognize him. And he'd be able to blend in.
Carrying around Goliath's sword.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no,
they had short swords back then. The swords were relatively short back then, so it could have looked like he just had a long sword and.
Yeah, like was it who carried Sephiroth? Never mind. I don't know.
It's not like he was. It wasn't like he, was a Svehang, what do you call it? Svehanda or whatever it's called, where it's like if you stood it next to you, it'd be like as tall as your head,
Okay, so for this commentary, because there is conflation between how the ordering of the verses are between the Hebrew Bible and the Old Testament, I'm going to say, so Aaron will not be confused, 1 which is 2. When I say that, I mean 1 in the Old Testament, which is 2 in the Hebrew Bible. Okay? So we'll start on verse 1, which is 2. Achimelech. He is the great grandson
the one God that is 3?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So Achimelech, he is the great grandson of Eli the priest, and the brother of Achia, son of Achitub, brother of Ichabod, son of Phinehas. Some, like Titrani, R.P. Gordon, and Herzberg, identified Achimelech with Achia, since Melech may be a divine element like Yah, but this is not widely accepted among commentators. The Septuagint, or at least the Vaticanus, reads Abimelech. Yeah.
Quite different.
Yeah. So on verse 2, which is 3, as for my men, I have told them to meet me. The Hebrew it's ve'et hanarim yodati. The verb yodati is a po'al of the root yud daled ain, to know, and thus I caused to know. Traditional commentators understand yodati as hodati, I have informed, with the changing of the letters he and yud. 4Q Samuel A reads ya'adati, I arranged to meet. The Septuagint seems to follow this reading with I have testified. While most modern commentators follow the 4Q Samuel A in the Septuagint and take the Masoretic text to be corrupt, Tsumura notes James Barr's suggestion that the Masoretic text form might be translated as I sent or dismissed, considering the Arabic wada, quote, say farewell, take leave of, abandon, or leave. On verse 4, which is 5, consecrated bread, in Hebrew, lechem hakodesh, or lechem kodesh, also called the bread of display, lechem apanim, in verse 7. According to Leviticus 24, verses 5 through 9, this bread consisted of 12 loaves arranged in rows on the pure table in the sanctuary. This bread was set out on every Sabbath and was eaten by Aaron and his sons. Some traditional commentators asked how could the priest give the consecrated bread to non-priests? Kimchi notes that his father Joseph proposed that the bread described in this verse is the bread of thanksgiving, described in Leviticus 7 verses 12 through 14, which is allowed for foreigners. Gersonides proposed that the prohibition of the consecrated bread was more lenient. Klein writes that it is possible that at David's time, the regulation that only priests could eat the bread of display had not yet been formulated.
And he does ask if they are, ceremonially clean and have been kept from women, him and the presumable men who are totes with him for realsies, guys.
Right.
Although
so it could be that the rules changed, right?
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of that reflected. Although when Jesus talks about this story, he gets it wrong because he says David and his companions, even though there aren't any companions. That's just they're part of a cover story.
Maybe they were giving him bread to share with his companions that he will meet later.
They did. Yeah, that's what's happening from the priest's perspective. But we know it's a cover story for David because he's obviously
he wanted
running
12
for his
loaves of
life.
bread for himself.
Yeah, I should note Ephraim, who writes that David was allowed to eat the bread, although he was not a priest in the formal sense. He was considered one since he was a temple of the Holy Spirit. David himself was the temple.
Oh my
Okay,
God!
it's easier to just say, "Oh, God was with him," because it's always God's on his side and stuff. It's easier to just use that.
Yeah,
you don't gotta say
or
he's
it
the
was,
temple.
The circumstances. There was nothing else, and so they were like, okay, but you have to be pure.
Yeah, it's there's too much lenience in the story. We can't have any lenience about religious rules because God and purity and smiting and rage bait. So
yeah. Now on on that same verse actually, provided the men have kept themselves from women, i.e., from having sexual relations, since that can make a man impure, as we see in Leviticus 15:16. Klein writes that sexual abstinence was a regular practice of people engaged in holy war, as we see in Deuteronomy 23, verses 10 through 15, which is 9 through 14 in the Old Testament, Joshua 3:5, 2 Samuel 11, 11 through 12, or who expected to participate in the cult in Exodus 19:15. Tsumura notes that such a rule appears in the Qumran War Scroll in column 7, line 3. On verse 5, which is 6, the men's bodies. Hebrew Bible reads, Klei hana'arim, literally, the vessels or tools of the young men, as we see in the Vulgate, Targum, and Peshitta. The tools are described either as weapons, according to Stobe, clothes, according to Kara and Kimchi, or utensils, according to Bar-Efrat. Some commentators, like Herzberg and Klein, take the vessels to be a euphemism for the genitals. Tsumura writes that this seems preferable, for why would David bring up literal weapons? Septuagint and 4Q Samuel A read, all the lads have become consecrated, reading kol instead of kli. This reading is favored by McCarter and Auld.
Well,
Okay,
it doesn't
just,
make
I
much
just want to
sense.
make sure I understand this. So he's not carrying around actual weapons. He's carrying around genitals as a euphemism for weapons. So when he gets Goliath's sword,
No,
No, it's the part of keeping pure from women. It makes more sense to say, have they kept their dongs out of women than have they kept their forks out of women?
I mean, body
Never.
also works better because
Mhm.
first of all, you could think of a body as being a vessel, but also like it says, all the more than the consecrated food be put into their vessels today. Like that wouldn't make sense if it was talking of genitals.
It's just their bodies, which would include the
Yeah.
genitals. But yeah,
Yeah,
it makes
vessels
more
or
sense
vessels
as
of body kind of makes sense,
body,
but not.
yeah.
Yeah.
I will point out that halot does assign this to mean more like garments
yeah, As
instead
like,
of weapons or
okay.
vessels.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
what is it, like jizz on their clothing? Is that the thing? Their clean clothes?
Maybe. It's odd. On verse 7, which is 8, detained before the Lord. In Hebrew, ne'etzar lifnei Yehovah. The verb ne'etzar is a nif'al form of the root ein tzadik resh, to stop, restrain, or retain. Septuagint reads, detained ne'esaran before the Lord. Yeah, because the Septuagint is, the Hebrew Bible is a translation of the Septuagint, obviously.
Of course.
Wait,
Yeah.
What does the Septuagint say?
Detained ne'esaran before the Lord. It just reads ne'etzar, just like that. Yeah.
Which verse?
Which doesn't mean anything in Greek.
7 or 8 depends on the if it's the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rashi renders
Yeah,
he tarried. Sorry.
Ne'esaran, yeah, that's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, just that. Rashi renders, he tarried before the tent of meeting to engage in the study of Torah. Kimchi proposed that Doeg came to sacrifice with other people, and when these people left, he remained to pray or sacrifice more. Ditrani proposed that the day was Sabbath, and so he couldn't have entered the sanctuary. Klein notes Stobe's opinion that Doeg may have been held at Shiloh by a vow, an initiation oracle, or some act of penance. McCarter notes Ernst Kutsch's opinion that Doeg was celebrating a holiday before Yahweh in the temple, reading Ne'etzar as taking a holiday. Auld notes that in the Hebrew Bible, in every instance of Ne'etzar, the subject of was restraint is plague, magefa, as we see in 2 Samuel 24, 21, and 25, Numbers 17, 13, and 15, which is 16, 48, 15 in the Old Testament, and 25, 8. Such a plague is always at Yahweh's direction. He further writes, quote, within Samuel through Kings, the restraint of Doeg is the only instance of Ne'etzar, apart from the census story and the one other exception. 1 Kings 8:35 speaks of the heavens as being restrained from giving rain. There too, Yahweh is responsible for the restraint of the rain. Given how Doeg will act against the priests, it is entirely suitable that he is described in terms appropriate for a pestilential blow, not simply restrained, quote-unquote, but restrained before Yahweh. It may also be textually significant that another form of the same Hebrew word has just been used, in verse 5, which is 6, of women being under restraint, atzura, as far as David's men are concerned. Personal restraint, ma'atzar, is commended in a verse from Proverbs 25:28. Quote, a city broken into without a wall is a man for whose spirit there is no restraint. On Doeg the Edomite, the etymology of his name is unclear. The root Dalet Aleph Gimel means to worry or care. Ulrich Hubner, in the Anchor Bible Dictionary, suggested that it is a shortened form of a theophoric name with confessional and or trusting character, i.e. God cares about or has cared about. Klein writes that Doeg's Edomite nationality marks him as a potentially sinister character, as we see in Genesis 25, verses 25 and 30, Numbers 20, verses 14 through 21, and 2 Samuel 8, 13 through 14. Tsumura quotes from R.P. Gordon, quote, "It was possible for Edomites to quote, enter the assembly of the Lord," end quote, as we see in Deuteronomy 23:8, which is 70 in the Old Testament, and there may even be hints in the Old Testament of common cultic ties between Israel and Edom.
Yeah. So we did talk about this a little bit when I was initially talking about the Deuteronomistic history, and especially Ruth too, right? Because the relationship to other places, they would have had to have some allyship in their history, right? And especially if you're talking about like during the exile, where like their closest cultural relatives, even though they weren't all Israelites, they were like close enough where they had to kind of get along, and then eventually, uh, you'd have to kind of be okay with that sort of thing. But then you have people like Ezra and Nehemiah come along, and they're like, no mixing, no mixing. That's bad. Um, so that kind of speaks to them actually doing that. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a provision against it. The But yeah, like Edom, Moab, a whole lot of places that are so many times polemicized against in the biblical texts had fairly close relations. I mean, they were right there. Like they were not culturally all that different.
Yeah, they pretty much spoke the same language as well.
Right.
Mutually intelligible.
Sorry. On that same verse again, chief shepherd, in Hebrew, Abir HaRoim. The word Roim means shepherds and is rendered as such by most early translations. However, McCarter, following Gretz, Budd, and Smith, renders Roim as Ratzim, runners, based on the word's appearance in 22:17. According to this reading, Doeg was the chief of Saul's runners. While Klein favors this reading, Auld and Tsumura preserve the Masoretic text, since there is no textual support for this emendation. Septuagint, Josephus in Antiquity 6, 244, and Pseudophilo in LAB 63:2 take Doeg to be in charge of Saul's mules. The word Abir usually denotes someone who is powerful, as we see in Genesis 49:24, Isaiah 49:26, and 60:16, and so can denote a leader or chief. Van Staldine Solman notes that in a margin of Codex Orichelinianus, Doeg is taken to be, quote, Saul's teacher of the disciples, end quote. She further writes, quote, whereas Tanaitic rabbis considered Doeg to be a villain, Amoraic sources depict Doeg the Edomite as a sage. Babylonian sources depict him as a sinful sage, and manifest substantially less anxiety about it than do Palestinian Amoraim. The latter Amoraim attempted in several ways to harmonize Doeg's being a sage with the biblical depiction. For example, they denied or ignored Doeg's wickedness, or they claimed that Doeg's learning was only superficial. Consequently, the explanation that Doeg was Saul's scholar originates from Amoraic times or later.
Interesting. So this could have been a character assassination of a known individual by giving this particular character this name.
Could be. On verse 9, which is 10, behind the ephod. This phrase is absent from the Vaticanus, but is preserved in 4 Samuel B, Peshitta, and the Alexandrinus. Lucianic recension reads epomis, literally on the shoulder, which according to Auld is, quote, the standard rendering of the ephod of the Pentateuch, end quote. He takes the Masoretic text and 4 Samuel B to have the original text, with Alexandrinus and Lucianic recension being a correction of the Vaticanus. McCarter writes that the ephod here does not refer to any kind of vestment, and perhaps is some kind of object of veneration, perhaps a divine image, as was in Judges 8:27, 16:7, and 18:14-20. On verse 10, sorry.
Did you say that Rashi says that behind the ephod, he translates it as after talking to the ephod, like after consulting the Urim and Thummim?
No, I didn't include that.
Okay. That's an interesting idea. He was like, oh, there couldn't have been a sword like behind the ephod in the tabernacle. So he has to translate it as, the priest said this to David only after he had consulted it and said, it was somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the consecrated parts of the building.
On verse 10, which is 11, Achish, king of Gath. It is not clear why David fled to Gath, given that he killed Goliath, who was from Gath, and also carried his sword. This also puzzled Chazal, as we see in Midrash Tehillim 34, quote, God said to David, quote, you are going to Achish while yesterday you killed Goliath and his brother, who was a bodyguard of Achish, and you go to him with his sword in your hand, end quote.
Oh, that's interesting that that's interesting that they actually say Goliath and his brother, right? Because in the I think it's in Chronicles, right, where they make it that what's his face, Elhanan actually killed the brother. Yeah.
I think it's also 2 Samuel, right?
No,
mentioned
I
that
think in 2
Hanan-
Samuel, doesn't it say that Elhanan killed Goliath himself? I think.
Oh, yeah, 2 Samuel 21.
There is a contradiction there.
Yeah.
It's an interesting retcon, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that they include both there. That's fun.
Yeah.
I know
Because-
they've unfixed it. They had the fix of that. Oh no, he didn't kill actual Goliath. He killed his brother, and then he unfixes it.
Yeah, in First Chronicles 25, verse 5, he killed Elhanan killed Lachmi, the brother of Goliath.
Mm-hmm.
Lachmi.
Lachmi.
That's it. Isn't that the name of like a Hindu goddess?
I don't know,
Yeah.
and don't make any connections.
I'm not.
You are. Do not
Listen.
insinuate.
The thing is, I don't think Isaac himself is making connections, but there are people who would totally roll with that.
Yes, exactly.
No, it's a goddess. I'm saying it's a
It
girl's
is
name.
possible for two characters
Yeah.
to have similar names and be unrelated. It's.
I know. Actually, no. I think it's wrong. It's not Lakshmi. It's Lakshmi. Something like that. I think.
Lakshmi. That sounds
okay.
right.
I think. Yeah. There's
Okay.
an S in there.
Bar-Efrat and Tsumura give a geographic reason. Gath was closer to the border of Judah, and Israelites tend to flee to it, as is evident from the story of Shimei's slaves, who also fled to Gath in 1 Kings 2:39. McCarter proposed that David wanted to enter the service of Achish, as he does later in chapter 27. Garsiel proposed that either David intentionally chose an illogical route to confuse Saul, and so went straight to the enemy's land, or that he thought he could remain anonymous in Gath for a short time.
I think there's another perspective also in that perhaps David felt comfortable entering or seeking refuge or whatever he was trying to do in this Philistine city because perhaps he already had like the reputation that he was an enemy of Saul, and therefore an enemy of Saul is a friend of the Philistines.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I mean, that is a pragmatic way of looking at it.
Yeah, but they would be more scared of David than they would be scared of Saul, though. At that
The
point.
thing is, they were still. David was on
Yeah.
Saul's side. They would not like. I mean, yeah, sure. In this case, they're like, more afraid of David because he's kind of ran off on his own, right?
Also,
But
Jonathan didn't know he wanted to kill him. Why would they?
That
know?
he's drooling on himself.
the thing is, they still wouldn't like team up with like I don't even think they'd team up with Saul in this case or anything because like they were literally just in a battle.
Well, again, literally just like how much time has elapsed is not clear. David's remarkably supposed to be very young when he kills Goliath. I think it makes more sense that this story was contrived before they attributed the death of Goliath to David, and that was just another, a tribute to the hero, all the deeds that were done anytime in the vicinity that maybe happened later. But yeah, it's not terribly clear.
Yeah, I'm also not sure because it does
Right,
use like
this-
the standard phrase, right? Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't
Yeah.
mention Goliath. So it's like in this story,
Right. Yeah.
it's David is just someone who works for. I mean, they think he's the king of the land because he's
Yeah,
he's like he's like he's a great commander, but they doesn't say anything personal about him and Goliath or anything. So it's just like, oh, he's someone who kills Philistines.
Which
Yeah.
That would actually make sense considering how many times he's done that.
On verse 11, which is 12, David, king of the land. McCarter writes that king of the land may mean local chieftain, as the term melech haaretz does in Joshua 12, verses 1 and 7. Thus, the Philistines are unaware of David's true status and assume, based on his reputation, that he is a local ruler of some kind. He notes Herzberg's opinion that the title is meant to underline the fact that the divine plan is inviolably bound up with David. Likewise, Klein writes that while some see here an anachronism, the storyteller may attempt to indicate that the enemy Philistines were already perceiving David as king. Auld writes that the expression, quote, appears prescient of David's future greatness.
I actually kind of like Alter's comment on this. Appropriately, though, as J.P. Fackelman notes, what a name, they they use a somewhat vague designation instead of the more official King of Israel.
Yeah.
Hmm.
No. On verse
I mean,
13, which is, sorry.
was when Goliath issued his what's that word, like threat, whatever. He said, fight me. Whoever wins should be king, or whoever loses should be slaves to the other. So Rashi kind of says that the courtiers are telling the king Achish, like, well, this is the king. You should give your throne to him.
Oh, okay. I see.
He won.
Oh,
Like he defeated Goliath, and according to Goliath's stipulation, like he should,
you keep what
Yeah.
you kill.
yeah, if he will be able to fight me and kill me, then we will become your slaves. is what
Right. Yeah.
Goliath said.
Yeah.
I also
So
find it very ironic how you have the guy who defeated Goliath when he was much younger, apparently. Now he's carrying his sword, right? And then at the slightest hesitation, he fears that, maybe he needs to hide out. And he chickens out and leaves.
Well, he chickens out and acts like an insane buffoon, and then he leaves. Which I have to say, like the whole, you remember Sunday school, Mark, right? Like we were taught, David had so much faith. He faced Goliath with nothing but 5 stones, and because God was with him, and he had so much faith and showed it by. And we were taught, I was taught to like put your faith into practice by doing these ridiculous things as though you already had whatever it was you were claiming in the spirit or whatever nonsense. And like, yeah, that's all very well when it's Goliath, but apparently 5 minutes later he's grown up, has the big sword himself, and now he has to like act like a lunatic to get out of town. Like faith seems a bit hit and miss with David.
Yeah.
On verse 13, which is 14, he pretended to be insane in their presence. Hebrew Bible reads, Vayeshano et ta'amo be'enehem. Literally, and he changed his ta'amo in their eyes. The exact meaning of ta'amo is unclear. Most traditional commentators understand ta'amo to mean his words or his opinions, based on passages like Job 12:20 and Jonah 3:7. McCarter and Tsumura render he disguised his judgment. Auld renders and he altered it, his taste, quote unquote, in their eyes, because tam also means taste. Septuagint reads, he changed his face before him. Tsumura cites R.P. Gordon, quote, if, as is likely, madness was regarded with superstition, this will have worked to his advantage.
Yeah, I have one commentator that said that it was not customary to attack people that had issues. So maybe he feigned being mentally or some kind of handicap, and then that's
That
how he
didn't
gets
stop
out.
the Vikings attacking the monasteries.
also, I'm sure Saul also has some issues, apparently.
Well,
Yeah.
he at least he had a good model to fall back on.
Yeah.
There is a
Oh.
midrash, and these are like stories of David that, like, I mean, I grew up with at least one of them, where it was like David would say things to, like, he had like a personal relationship with God, and he'd be like, oh, everything you've made is so wonderful, but why did you create wasps, and why did you create spiders? And so apparently one of the things he asked him was, why did you create madness, insanity? And God was like, you'll see, you're going to use it at some point.
Oh my
You're going to find a
gosh.
use for madness.
As the Arabs say of all crazy people, be kind to them, their soul is with God.
The story, yeah, with the spider, it's like he's hiding from Saul, and he hides in a cave, and then the spider
that's
weaves
later.
a spider. Does it actually in the book?
Oh, not the spider, but the hiding in a cave.
Yeah, he hides in a cave, and the spider comes and covers the entrance of the cave with a big web, and then the soldiers are like, no one's in this cave. The spider web has been here for a while because it's so big. and then David was like, praise God for creating spiders,
And finally, verse 14, which is 15, insane. The Hebrew it's mishtagea, from the root shin gimel ain, to be insane. Klein writes that the root is occasionally used to indicate the ecstatic behavior of prophets, as we see in 2 Kings 9:11, Hosea 9:7, and Jeremiah 29:26, and is also used in Deuteronomy 28:34 to indicate how the curses of the covenant would drive people crazy. He also writes that verses 14 through 15, which is 15 through 16 in the Hebrew Bible, have some anti-Philistine bias, implying that Gath was full of wild men that they had no use for anymore. Tsumura notes the Akkadian cognate shegu, yeah, I like that. Tsumura notes the Akkadian cognate shegu, which denotes, quote, an attitude taken up by lions, dogs, other animals, and sometimes by women, which may be best described as highly aggressive, the opposite of peaceful, end quote, according to Wiseman. In this way,
Tomer, before I forget, could you actually post that one in the Discord and tag me in it? I want to use that for my disses of the ancient world thing.
yeah.
Yeah. By the way, the word for madman or madmen, I should say the plural, is meshugaim. Meshugoim. So that's where Meshuggah comes from, and Meshugas is like madness.
Wait, oh yeah, wait, hold on, Meshuggah, is that it?
Yeah, Meshuggah is like the more Yiddish. Yeah,
okay,
yeah, but in Hebrew it's Meshuggah.
Okay,
yeah,
crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in this way, David would be a danger to society, according to Baldwin. And that's it for my commentary on this part. Yeah, on this chapter. But I also have the Christians. Yeah.
Talking
I have
about
Christians.
the Goyim.
Well,
Yeah.
let's hear it.
Okay, Tertullian writes that Christ and his disciples.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah.
Tertullian,
Prepare
okay.
yourself. Christ and his disciples assuged. I don't know. Assuged their
How's it
Assuaged.
spelled?
Assuaged.
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 Yeah, that's a weird one.
Assuaged their hunger by breaking the Sabbath. This finds warrant in David's procurement of the holy bread, which illustrates the dispensation from fasting allowed to the Sabbath day.
Wow, he really went far with that one.
Wait, what's the
Yeah.
connection?
The
Jesus
dispensation.
used
So they both
this
ate.
story as an
Illus-
excuse for why his disciples didn't have to wash their hands before they ate grain, because it's basically it's kind of the same principle as the Sabbath is
Because
made
they
for
were
man, but not man
starving?
for the Sabbath. Yeah, because they the basically hunger is more urgent and important than following every minuscule bit of the law. And he got the story
Which is
wrong.
something the Pharisees would have agreed with, by the way.
Yes, I'm aware. The Sabbath made for man, not man for the Sabbath was actually said originally by a Pharisee scholar, and it's just that the Christians have shit all over them for centuries.
And there is just a second. There is a quote by Ambrose, which reads, let me just get to that. Even if they accuse, yet Christ accuses, and he makes the souls that he wishes that follow him similar to David, who ate the loaves of proposition outside of the law. For even then he foresaw in his mind the prophetic mysteries of a new grace. Meaning that-
pull shit out of
meaning-
nothing.
Meaning that by eating the holy loaves, David shows that he foresaw the prophetic mysteries of a new grace. No, that's
Wow. Yeah, Ambrose also has some issues. I'm actually citing him in the video I'm working on because he also says some really funny stuff. Like
Augustine,
he is criticizing the people of the time. They were like, hey, there isn't a he's mad at people that believe in like a celestial sphere that rotates with no water above it, because according to Ambrose, the firmament divided the waters and continues to. So he still believed that there were the waters above the firmament. And he's like, they have no right to question God.
Oh my God. Oh, so he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't even going to go with Dante's like ascending heavens thing. We can't even have that.
Well, I mean, he was
because-
way before Dante, but
No, I know, but it was an idea that had like existed for a while. The crystal domes, multiple moving planets thing. But yeah.
I mean, how else do you explain the blue skies, right? There's got to be water up there somewhere.
of course, yeah.
Yeah,
that's-
I
I
wouldn't be
wonder-
laughing at this guy so hard. There were people in my family that were still held to the I think it's Copernican concentric spheres.
No, that's
Yeah,
not
that's the
That's
one I'm
not
talking about.
Copernican.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah, my
that's
God.
either Plato or
Ptolemy.
Ptolemy,
Ptolemy, yes, that
Ptolemy
sounds
had
about
he had the retrograde
Epicycles and
rotation
deferens.
spheres. Epicycles,
Yeah,
yeah.
and
Yeah,
deferens.
maybe that's the difference between Ptolemy
Hell
and
of a
Plato.
lot
One
of
is
math.
just pure
Yeah, yeah.
circles, and one has the epicycles.
Um,
And I think Maimonides' system is Plato. I can't remember.
So
yeah,
trying
it
to
is.
explain to my relatives that science has abandoned that 400 years ago.
No, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
My
Way
family
back.
my family also all are geocentrist and Platonic, I guess. I wanted to say that the Hebrew word for heavens is it's plural, right? It's shamayim, which you could break down into two words as sham, there,
Yeah.
mayim, water.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's the actual etymology or not. But there is a similarity between mayim, water, and shamayim, heavens. But
Yeah,
yeah,
the
that's definitely how people thought of this blue sky, right? Obviously, it's water. Rain comes from there.
Augustine wrote that as David's son, Christ is testified to in Scripture as both king and priest by David's kingship and priestly act of eating the showbread. Augustine again writes that Scripture's figurative expressions and actions, like David's pretense of insanity, should be judged as prophecies, which are veiled to exercise the mind and to increase their meaning. And
Can we just get a cope harder sign for the ancient Christian apologists? Just cope harder.
And finally, Cassiodorus says that the signifying a great mystery, David's spittle represents the Scriptures flowing with abundant strength.
That is the worst one I've heard yet. He's pretending to be insane. What?
That's disgusting.
I would make a better apologist than him. Jesus
What
Christ.
did he say about the spittle?
He said that it represents the Scriptures flowing with abundant strength.
I don't think it's possible to be a worse apologist than that. I have never seen enough drugs to make me a worse apologist than that. That is gross.
He couldn't have talked about Jesus spitting in someone's eye or something like.
Yeah, because he did that to heal someone. He
Yeah.
could have easily mentioned that.
Yeah, oh look, the
mean-
thing that appears disgusting is really a saving grace because something spit Jesus David. You could bullshit on that for a while, but what the hell?
I mean, if anyone's been to a charismatic meeting of some sort where they prey on people and start going wild, that many of them actually start foaming at the mouth at some point.
Okay, now do you call it being slain in the spirit, or did you call it what was the other thing they call it?
Yeah, I'm slain in the spirit. Yeah.
Yeah, see,
sure.
there's another one that they call it in the South. I think maybe the black churches call it something different, where you fall over and faint because the Jesus got you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Dusty
wait, hold on.
called it that other thing.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Shit.
Although honestly, that's less insane than when they bark like dogs and cluck like chickens and shake uncontrollably.
Yeah, I'm done. But Aaron is not here. Oh, there.
Okay.
Oh, there he is. He
All right.
just rushed over.
Yeah,
All right. So are we moving over to 23 now?
22.
Look at us.
22.
22 though.
Didn't we just read 22?
No, we read 21.
My mistake. Okay.
20 was long.
All right. So David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and father's household heard of it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him. From there, David went to Mitzpah in Moab and said to the king of Moab, "Would you let my father and mother come stay with you until I learn what God will do for me?" So he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him as long as David was in the stronghold. But the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not stay in the stronghold. Go into the land of Judah." So David left and went to the forest of Hareth. Now, Saul heard that David and his men had been discovered, and Saul was seated, spear in hand, the way he is, under a tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah, or however you say
Give
that.
I think in English it's Gibeah. Yeah.
Gibeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Something like that.
With all his officials standing at his side. He said to them, "Listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why you have all conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie in wait for me as he does today." But Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, "I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. He also gave him provisions with the sword of Goliath the Philistine." Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and all of the men of his family who were priests at Nob, and they all came to the king. Saul said, "Listen now, son of Ahitub." "Yes, my lord," he answered. Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today?" Ahimelech answered the king, "Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law, captain of your bodyguard and highly respected in your household? Was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant or any of his father's family, for your servant knows nothing at all about this whole affair." But the king said, "You will surely die, Ahimelech, you and your whole family." Then the king ordered the guards at his side, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. They knew he was fleeing, yet they did not tell me." But the king's officials were unwilling to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. The king then ordered Doeg, "You, turn and strike down the priests." So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck them down. That day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. He also put to the sword Nob, the town of the priests, with its men and women, its children and infants, its cattle, donkeys, and sheep, because you got to kill every fucking thing. But one son of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled to join David. He told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. Then David said to Abiathar, "That day when Doeg the Edomite was there, I knew he would be sure to tell Saul. I am responsible for the death of your whole family. Stay with me. Don't be afraid. The man who wants to kill you is trying to kill me too. You will be safe with me." That's not really an assurance.
Well,
No?
it has very much like far more violent militia Robin Hood vibes. Like, I'm no longer on the right side of the law. Everyone who has troubles with the law, we all come and we hang out in the forest and we defend ourselves and each other. But yeah, this again, it's giving bandits in Skyrim vibe very much. But yeah, these are everybody who's in trouble comes and they form this little militia group in the woods. But it's interesting.
And they're all
this
wearing
story.
green tights.
Yeah, well, they're men in tights. Manly men.
Mary.
Manly, merry men in tights. But and you see later that certain of them are named and do great deeds and all the rest of it. But it's reasonable to assume that if any of this was based in reality, it would be something that people would hesitate to do, to kill priests, because if you believe in the supernatural in any sense, it is always a bad idea to go around slaughtering priests.
It's not just that. It's sorry.
It's also like they wouldn't have. They're thinking that their king is delusional. Like, it's why are you killing these people? They didn't know. They had no reason. Like they believed what the priest was saying. Like, I didn't know that he was a bad guy.
Yeah, like he's been sent to me before. But I was always taught that this was basically because it was the final fulfillment, or supposed to be almost the final fulfillment of the prophecy of Samuel against Eli and his sons, that they basically their line would be taken out of the being the high priest because of them stealing the fat of some of God's food.
Right. So the thing is, this place, Nob, right, that would become, like, I think after the fall of Shiloh, right, this was supposed to be the place that they all went, all the sons of Eli went. So like it would make sense then with that context. But there are a couple things that I wanted to note. So firstly, we see the relationship between David and Moab, right, that he's allowed to hide with the or he's led to, he seeks safety with Moab. So that kind of explains the connection we get in the book of Ruth for him. And then you have the slaughter of the priests, right? This where was it? Well, I can't find the verse right now, but it seems really interesting to me, that maybe just kind of funny, I guess, not necessarily even interesting, but it seems that, like, the only people that don't know where David is are, like, Saul and his entourage, because everyone else seems to know where the hell he is, even though he's supposed to be.
And his family just like walks out like, "Hey,
yeah,
bro,
he's like,
what's
"Oh,
up?
hey, we heard you were here." Yeah, so it's very easy
Saul
for
has
them.
a very poor spy network. He needs to fire his spy master. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, and also the inclusion of Gad, the prophet, out of nowhere.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yep.
No introduction necessary. He's just there.
Yeah.
Just one thing.
Sorry.
I just said one thing is, like, the English name for this character, Abiathar, like, very different from the Hebrew, which I've always liked that name. It's Evyatar, like, not Abi.
Abathar, I've heard.
Yeah, I like
or
like Evyathar.
Aviathar.
I guess in English it would become Eb, but whatever. But still.
Yeah. I have comment on Gad, but I'll get to that. So I'll start on verse 1. The cave of Adulam. Adulam is generally identified as modern Tel Esh Sheikh Matkur, located 16 miles southwest of Jerusalem in the Shephelah. Verses 4 and 5 describe the cave, Me'ara, as a stronghold, Metsudah. Thus, Wellhausen amended the stronghold of Adulam, a reading favored by McCarter, who writes that Adulam was a well-fortified hilltop. However, all early translations read cave, and Tsumura writes that there is no justification for changing two letters. Moreover, this may not have been the stronghold in verse 4. Adulam is listed as a city of Judah in Joshua 15:35, and the cave was probably nearby. Bar-Efrat also notes that the area around Adulam is full of caves. On verse 2, everyone that was discontented, I'm using the KJV. In Hebrew, it's Kol ish mar nefesh, every man with a bitter spirit. Kimchi, Gersonides, and Abravanel took the bitterness as referring to poverty, as seen in the parallel with nefesh and rash, which means poor, in Proverbs 31:6-7. Likewise, Klein writes that a bitter spirit typified people who were homeless or bereft, or who had suffered great loss, as we see in Hannah in 1 Samuel 1:10, the men of Ziklag over the loss of their children in 36, and David in 2 Samuel 17:8. McCarter writes, quote, "The point of the present passage is that David becomes the leader of all those men who have suffered some kind of loss or deprivation that has left them embittered." On verse 5, Gad. Gad is described as one of the court prophets who served under David, according to 2 Samuel 24, verses 11 through 19, 1 Chronicles 21, 9 through 19. Klein notes that certain chronicles are ascribed to Gad in 1 Chronicles 29:29, titled Words of Gad the Seer, and his commandments are also cited under Hezekiah in 2 Chronicles 29:25. According to Chazal in Talmud Bava Batra 15a, he and Nathan continued the writing of the book of Samuel after Samuel died. And there is also a pseudepigraphal book called the Book of Gad the Seer, which I think was transmitted by the Cochin Jews, if I remember correctly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The Jews in India.
Yeah. There is an interesting story there. On that same verse, go into the land of Judah. According to Joshua 15:35, Adullam is considered a city of Judah. Klein notes that Herzberg argued that Adullam lay so near Philistine territory that it could be regarded as part of it, compared Joshua 12:50. Also, Stobe suggested that Adullam was not under contested Israelite control at the time of Saul. On the forest of Cheret, in Hebrew Ya'ar Charet, Klein notes that several scholars like Wellhausen, Budd, and Stobe suggested that Charet is an Aramaic variant of Choresh, found in 1 Samuel 23:15, verses 18 and 19, which they identify as Chirbet Choresa, 5 or 6 miles southeast of Hebron. McCarter compared it with Charas, the name of a modern village near Chirbet Kila, which preserves the name of ancient Keilah. Septuagint reads, the city of Sarik. Josephus in Antiquity 6249 reads, the city of Saris. Both reflect the reading Ir, city, instead of Ya'ar, forest. On verse 7, men of Benjamin. Bar-Efrat writes that Saul emphasizes the men's tribal association to hint to the natural connection between him and them. Because of this connection, it is appropriate that they should be loyal to Saul, and not to David the Judite. Auld notes that the only other example of this precise pairing, in Judges 19:16, quote, forms part of a note that the inhabitants of Gibeah were Benjaminites, end quote. He notes the double entendre, you Benjaminites, or you sons of my right hand, and writes, quote, even his own tribe, even his right-hand men, have failed to keep him up to date. On verse 8, Auld comments, Saul has earlier consulted Jonathan grossly about his parentage in 2030, and now he insults both his staff and his son. Now Jonathan is accused of having set up Hekim, Saul's servant, quote-unquote, against him. The other supposedly right-hand sons, quote-unquote, are no better than the son of Jesse. Saul has not called him David since he fled from court. If they are not already in the pay of the son of Jesse, they must be banking on his future largesse. Conspiracy or revolt, in Hebrew kesher, is known in many courts and governments. David would suffer from the revolt of one of his sons in 2 Samuel 15:31, and 3 of his successors in Jerusalem would be killed on conspiracies, quote-unquote, as we see in 2 Kings 12:21, 14:19, 21, verses 23 and 24. But within the books of Kings, it is a principal feature of the ever-changing dynasties of northern Israel. On verse 10, Achimelech inquired of the Lord for him. We find no reference to such an act in chapter 21, but Achimelech will admit that he inquired of God in verse 15. Several commentators, like Garsiel and Tsumura, suggested that Doeg was lying, with Garsiel writing that Achimelech's affirmative response was part of his line of defense, that he acted inadvertently during the entire episode. Therefore, he did not attempt to dispute Doeg's claim regarding the inquiry of God. Bar-Efrat, however, writes that Doeg saw Achimelech from a distance going after the ephod, to get Goliath's sword and remove it from the cloth that it was wrapped in. Doeg thought that the priest went to inquire of God, since that was the ephod's purpose. On verse 14, Auld comments, Ahimelech's robust response seeks to defend David's reputation in verse 14 before his own in verse 15. The priest's defense of David, he calls him by his given name and not son of Jesse with Saul and Doeg, makes 4 brief, balancing, and interrelated points. The first and fourth use the assonant and mutually reinforcing participles ne'eman and nechbad. The qualities of trust, truth, and reliability stated in the one are recognized and valued in the other. The David, who is trusted and reliable among Saul's servants, is also honored in his whole household. Then the first and third ground David's reputation for reliability in his attention to Saul's wishes. And finally, the relatedness of second and fourth underscore the more domestic sense of household. David, as Saul's son-in-law, has an intimate relationship to the royal house. The trust, truth, and reliability claimed by the priest are the very antithesis of Saul's charge of revolt and conspiracy. On Doeg, in the Masoretic text, the name Doeg is in the Kirei, but the Ketiv is Doeg. Rashi, based on Talmud Yerushalmi Sanhedrin 10.2, wrote that Saul said to Doeg, quote, "You are caught like a fish, Dag, you informed on them, so you slay them," end quote. However, David also calls him Doeg in the Ketiv. Tsumura writes that the Ketiv is a phonetic spelling, reflecting the phonetic reality of palatalization from Aleph to Yud. On 85 men who wore the linen ephod, Septuagint attests to 305 men killed. Josephus, in Antiquity 6:260, attests to different numbers in different manuscripts. 85 in 2 manuscripts, 305 in 1 manuscript, 385 in 3 manuscripts, also found in Pseudo-Philo LAB 63.3, and 530 in 1 manuscript. Most early translations and commentators favor the Masoretic text reading of 85, being the smaller number, according to McCarter. But Kimchi proposed that Doeg killed a higher number of priests, with 85 of them being worthy of wearing the linen ephod. On verse
By
19,
the way, the linen ephod, right? Was this considered like, we know that this wasn't the costume or the outfit, the uniform of a regular priest. It would have been, is it possibly just like relatives of the high priest sort of thing?
Well, I think it was supposed to be, right, because the attire of the priesthood is what it says, at least in SBL, right? Linen ephod, the attire of the priesthood.
Yeah, but
So-
in other places where it describes the garments of a priest, like there's a high priest has an ephod.
Yeah, the high priest
and
would have something else, but like the regular priests,
they don't have an ephod in, at least not in like, the Pentateuch version. They have shorts, a linen like oval shirt, a belt, and a hat, and that's it. There's no like the word ephod is only really used in the Pentateuch to describe what the high priest has, and it's colorful and made of like multicolored linen, different threads and stuff. And then we have the one that is in Judges, which is not exactly sure what it was used for, but it's also called linen. So it's interesting.
So I guess, okay, so do you guys remember when, I think, was it Gideon who set up an ephod, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I'm talking about.
Was that Gideon? Yeah. So now it's interesting, like, so was he setting up like this poor man's version, or was he setting up the funky special one?
Maybe. Okay, on verse 19, Klein writes that Nob is put under a total ban, following the laws for cities in the land, as we see in Deuteronomy 13, verses 16 through 17, and 20, 16 through 17. He notes that the term edge of the sword, lefi cherev, also occurs in holy war contexts, Joshua 10:28, 30 and 32, and Judges 1, verses 8 and 25. He writes, quote, Saul had neglected to carry out the ban against Agag in chapter 15, which led to his loss of kingship. Now he saw to it that the ban was carried out on Yahweh's priests. On verse 20, about Eviatar, McCarter comments, The priest David protects, Evyatar, will eventually share the position of high priest with Zadok during David's reign as king in 2 Samuel 20:25, until finally, having sided with Adoniah over the succession issue in 1 Kings 1:7, he will be banished from court by Solomon after David's death in 1 Kings 2:26-27. This then is the one man spared at Yahweh's altar, quote, to wear out his eyes and use up his strength, end quote, of whom the man of God foretold in the oracle in 2 verses 27-36. And the slaughter described here is the fulfillment of the threat made there to Eli in verse 31, insofar as the priests of Nob are his, i.e. Eli's, descendants. So we can see that this passage came to have an important function in the prophecy and fulfillment scheme of the Josianic history of the kingdom, with its emphasis on the election of Jerusalem and its priesthood, and the corresponding rejection of Shiloh and the house of Eli.
Yeah.
And finally, on verse 22, I am responsible for the death of your whole family. The word translated to responsible is saboti. The word is taken by some, like BDB Dictionary and Tsumura, to be a kal form of the root samech bet bet, to turn around. Tsumura writes that it may be a shortened form of the key phrase in this episode, went around upon, as seen in verse 17. He writes, quote, even though it was Doeg who went around and fell upon the priests in verse 18, David acknowledges that it was he who went around and did that, end quote. Septuagint and Peshitta read, I am responsible, in the Greek, aitios. This reading is favored by McCarter and Klein, and write that it attests to the reading chavoti, or chovoti. Auld, however, writes that neither is aitios used anywhere else in the Old Testament books within the Hebrew Bible, nor is the root chet vav bet attested in kal. And that's it for my commentary, though I do have Christians.
Just one last thing.
Yes.
Is in the Septuagint for the verse about the 85 priests killed, does it say linen ephods or just ephods?
Let me check.
Yeah, because there could be like a uniform ephod and then the like divination
No,
ephod.
I was wondering if maybe like the tradition that only the high priest wears an ephod is later, then the Masoretic would have been like the 85 priests wearing an ephod. That doesn't make sense. That's right, linen.
It just says ephod, not linen.
Right.
Okay.
The Masoretic added linen to say that this is like, they weren't wearing the ephod. They were wearing
well, the divination tool, the ephod, as opposed to a priestly garment ephod. There does seem to be some it's not quite clear, because I don't think each of them would be wearing a full divination thing with precious stones and stuff. Like that's just awkward.
It's a contradiction with, like if you go to Exodus whatever,
well,
where it says that they only have those full garments and the high priest wears an ephod, and then I feel like the ephod seems to have changed over time, and it's possible even that teraphim, like a little idol or something, would have been like its oldest form, like because it seems to be a freestanding object, and Gideon makes a golden one, and
I could see that. Definitely possible.
Well, McCarter writes, let me see, he takes the Septuagint reading to be a haplography. It had lost bad by haplography after ephod. Kal is a simple expansion. Kol is a simple expansion, sorry. But Klein favors the Septuagint reading and says that the Masoretic text adds linen. The adjective linen is proper only where the ephod is a garment. So here, because it's not a garment, he takes it as being.
They're not garments.
Well, it could have been. It could have been the linen garment that designated that they were
wearing it.
Consecrated priests. You wear garments.
The adjective linen is proper only where the ephod is a garment.
Right. Well, which verse is this again? This is
18.
18, yeah. That's right.
21, 22, 18.
Hey, who wore Chamisha ish noseh ephod. But okay, so you're saying it doesn't actually mean that they wore it? It means that they bore it? They were like.
I guess.
So actually the original is like, the priest that held the ephod, which could have been some sort of freestanding object thing, and then over time became a garment, and also only the high priest has Interesting.
And also note the Alexandrinus has the Masoretic text reading, but the Vaticanus and Lucianic Recension do not. They don't have the Elian. Okay, so the Christians. So Ambrose writes that David's presence in the cave is analogous to the bodily existence of the just, who are engaged repeatedly in spiritual battles.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Bede reads the story of David's escape as an allegory for Christ and the church. As relatives and discontents join David, the elect and the repentant who come to Christ are signified, while the 400 men suggest the unity of the four Gospels.
Is that why so many American militia / terrorist cells are made up of bitter Christian men who want to live in the woods and shoot stuff?
Probably.
Uh,
I have a very horrible
sorry.
comment from the Life application. I don't want to miss sharing it because it is horrible. It says, why did God allow 85 innocent priests and their families to be killed? Their deaths served to dramatize the nation, how a king could become an evil tyrant. Where were Saul's advisors? Where were the elders of Israel? Sometimes God allows evil to develop to teach us not to let evil systems flourish.
oh
Think about that.
my God. I need to let a town be slaughtered and burned so that people will know that kings can become tyrants, because nobody has already made that observation.
It's like everything in the Bible happened in real history, and it happened to teach us now, in modern times, a lesson. Like such egocentrism.
And yet Christians nowadays, a lot of them do not like democracy and want a king. Like hell, I was overhearing some asshole at a table last week talking about the fivefold ministry, which is literally anti-democracy Christian nationalist nonsense about how God ordains, these different positions of leadership in the church, yada yada yada. They don't call any of them king, but it's the same thing. It's divine, you should rule by divine right, basically. And that's like, even their apologetics can't stop contradicting itself. It's
Now, Gregory of Nyssa writes that as a tender of mules, which signify the evil, sterile nature that is not of God's creation, Doeg represents the wicked angel who draws human souls to evil.
sure, Jan.
And finally, Cassiodorus wrote that Doeg the Edomite, whose name means earthquakes, I have no idea. I have no idea how.
Does it mean quaking? Like
No.
Like shaking or something like that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay, so Doeg the Edomite, whose name means earthquakes, is rightly understood as a figure for the Antichrist, who will make martyrs and disturb the whole world.
I need something hard to bash my head against that is not expensive, because
Well, you read these things, Tomer, and I note that you don't even tremble in fear.
Why would I?
We're seeing people in the chat saying, repent and believe in the Gospels, and
Nah,
aren't we
I'm
supposed
Jewish.
to?
I'm Jew. You don't need to. Oh, thank you.
yes. Well, remember that we all know that all of this is true in all of its contradictory forms that are not contradictory at all, because shut up. And we know it deep in our souls, and we're repressing it in unrighteousness, which is why we turn to all of this, scholarship and knowledge and other nonsense like that. And really just, we're only doing it because we all want to have gay sex.
So I am looking into like why he would have thought it would have meant earthquake.
I so thought Lawrence was. Well, I am looking into having gay sex.
Just stay away from Grindr during the RNC. Apparently, they catch
Someone in the comments said we should find Jesus. So I said I already did on Grindr. So.
Oh,
that's fine.
so.
No, sorry, I was looking into why, but I was like, okay, so maybe because you said that was Gregory of Nyssa, right?
No, Cassiodorus.
Oh, okay.
He
Then
did.
I'm not sure.
He says that the names combined according to the authority of the fathers, i.e., Jerome and Augustine, mean earthquakes.
Okay, so we gotta look at like the Latin or something, because I was like looking at the
Maybe.
Greek, because the spelling of the Greek is doek. So like I was like, okay, so maybe there's like some root word or something in the Greek that means that. I haven't found it yet, but maybe.
Yeah.
So I'll continue to check that, but that is quite funny. So
Yeah,
we'll
it
have to
is.
probably look at the Latin.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
There's
done.
a gay Jesus on TikTok. I wonder if he's on
It
Grinder.
could, maybe I think I'm thinking of the word. It can be translated as worry.
Yeah, I said that. Yeah, it means
Yeah, so
worry
maybe
or to take
worry
care.
and like it's similar to like shaking with worry. I don't know. I don't know where he got.
But it's a
Yeah.
stretch. I highly
Yeah.
doubt it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I don't think we're going to be able to get to chapter 20.
Why? We have 3 hours.
Because I have a refrigerator being delivered momentarily.
Oh my god.
Oh,
Yeah. We had one that broke down, and my wife
Oh.
makes her own dog food and stuff because because it was
Aw.
cheaper. Unfortunately, we lost all of that, and so we're having to have another one, which means I have to move stuff out of the way. So I have to duck out and take care of that.
Hey, Lawrence, by the way, in the Vulgate, since you asked about the Latin, it just transliterates the name to Doec, D-O-E-C.
Yeah.
Okay, so it uses the Greek, of course. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
I don't know
so-
what. Sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that because I don't know Latin, so like if there's like some Latin parallel that would mean something closer to quake or shake, that would be. something
I
to
only
look
know a little bit of liturgical Latin.
Okay. All right. So then it would be 1 Samuel 23.
Yes. We
this-
managed
this
to do
next
it.
week?
Yeah, we managed to do 3 chapters finally after 1 Samuel 6 through 8.
Yeah, and I wish I could move on to the next one, but as I said, I've got something pending, and I'm going to have to get up and move stuff.
Okay.
Poor babe.
But appreciate everybody. Oh, we finally got a second comment. We've had only one comment throughout this entire show.
I think it's because Peter's been asleep this whole time.
I mean, there's been a couple trolls he's been batting about,
sorry.
just general. Believe in the Jeebus. Ugh.
I just woke up. What did you say,
so
Lawrence?
I said you're a
Ronaldo
great guy.
Martinez.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Ronaldo Martinez offers $1.99 and says, "What do you think about Hulk Hogan?" I don't.
Oh my God! Thoughts about Hulk Hogan as a wrestler. So at the time he wasn't very good, right? No one actually was a great wrestler back in like the 80s. But the thing is, he was a great character, right? This over the top kind of Go America kind of character, and he was always a really good talker. So it's not like a shock that he gave such a good speech at the RNC, but then of course he was always just kind of a jackass. Backstage politics, always trying to get wins for himself, even though it's a fucking it's wrestling. Like, you can put someone over, you can lose, and that's fine. No one cares. It doesn't make you look weak. It's wrestling. So but he refused to do it because he was like, oh my God, this is awful. There's this crazy story between him and Shawn Michaels where they were gonna do this best of 3 kind of feud, and Hogan was gonna win 2 of those matches, but Hogan was like, no, I don't want to lose it all. So instead, we're gonna have 1 match, and I'm gonna win it. So the one match they had at SummerSlam 2005, it was hilarious because Shawn Michaels oversold everything. He made a kick look devastating. He'd do 4 or 5 flips after each kick and punch, and he made it look hysterical. And then all this stuff that came out from Gawker, I think, right? All the stuff about him, using the N-word and saying he doesn't want his kid dating a black person or something. It's awful shit. Horrible racist Hulk Hogan. And so racist, in fact, that when he came out and gave this Hall of Fame speech years later, the New Day, an all-black tag team, they didn't stand up and clap for Hulk Hogan because he fucking sucks. He's a piece of shit, and he always has been. Egotistical, megalomaniac. No wonder Trump loves him.
No, they just
I
sound
mean-
like two peas in a pod. Pathetic and delusional and raging, and yeah, it's I mean, I knew he played a delusional jackass beefhead, but I didn't know that he didn't understand that was meant to be a character.
I
No,
think
he
Hulk
didn't
Hogan
play
is
a
the
delusional
perfect
jackass. He
example.
always played the good guy until the NWO, where he actually turned heel. But
I think Hulk Hogan is the perfect example of what happens if people slam your head into the floor too often. I might be wrong, but
yeah,
I
that's
mean,
not wrong.
fair.
But the I mean, there are plenty of wrestlers who are not pieces of shit. The
Yet.
yeah.
they didn't get slammed
some
hard
of them do
enough.
go that way. Yeah. CTE is real.
Yes.
It's pretty bad.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, one last comment, Arn.
All right. Oh, I got one more comment. Okay, so give me to the back to that screen. Okay, John Klein says $2. Go install your new beer fridge, Arn. Well, this isn't a beer fridge. This is a proper fridge.
Yeah.
People
just
know
like
you too well, Arn.
Teasing you,
Dog food.
silly man.
I grant that I have 2 beer fridges.
See?
And I'm sure you don't just put any beer there, right? It's gotta be as dark as it
The
gets.
good beer.
There's no room for dog food in any of the 2. We got it.
Right, drink it down to save the dog food. You gotta do your part, Aaron.
Don't put dog food in the beer fridge. I'm getting a proper fridge. Anyway.
Oh, and I saw someone in the comments saying that the New Day guys play D&D. Yeah, they're fucking nerds. Xavier Woods, one of them, has a gaming channel. It's called Up Up Down Down. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, I don't know any of these people because that's not my world. But that sounds more fun than being a wrestler, honestly.
You know what? They're just having a good time.
Speaking about nerds, Lawrence, isn't there something you need to mention at the end of every show?
Of course. I need to mention 2 things, actually. Number 1 is join the Discord. And number 2 is we are starting the Quran on Wednesday.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Damn.
Which order are you going to do an order of Revelations?
So we have a translation that is like an order of revelations. Then we have, I don't know how many of those we have, maybe one of those. And then we have like a bunch that are like, the longest surahs come first, except for the first one. But, that's the exception.
Yeah, I did mine in order of Revelations, and it's funny how.
But the thing is, even the order of revelations thing, that's debated, right?
Yeah, because in the order of Revelations, shit still doesn't match.
Yeah, but you said translation. You know that unless you read in the Arabic, that
Right.
you're
Yeah,
not
we
really
do.
reading the Quran.
I remember because I was doing like Duolingo with Arabic for I did it for 50 days straight or something. But that was like a year or 2 ago, and I barely remember any of my Arabic, so I can't
Well,
even
it
transliterate
doesn't matter. It's not supposed to be understood in Arabic. It's supposed to be recited until you work yourself into a frenzied state of ecstasy, and then that means it's God.
When are you doing the Quran shows?
Wednesdays. They're gonna be Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Central Standard.
Sounds fun.
Right, and it's fulfilled prophecy because the Quran says that people will recite it, and Muslims recite it, so that's a prophecy.
Amazing.
Yeah, when I can, I might like to participate if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun. I kind of want to get a new computer before we get more guests, because usually we have computers. We usually use my laptop for that. It's not working amazing, so
It still runs on Windows XP.
so I gotta get an
Yeah.
update before before we have more guests on that show.
Nothing
Well,
wrong with
okay.
Windows XP.
Lawrence, Iconicer wasn't here for the pre-show, so he asked, have you decided on a title yet?
Yeah, so we have not decided on a title yet. I want to get some really good ones and then do a poll or something. But there are a few contenders that I've seen.
Like
My-
what?
My suggestion was Quranic lectures and theology, but then I thought religious people wouldn't be able to find that.
Yeah, so the
QLIT.
there were a few that I was looking at. So one of them that I really liked was the how was it? So Tomer's was really good, but it was too long. Deep insightful Quran study was pretty good. But yeah, we're looking for like a shorter one because we want the actual titles to fit. There was thoughtful Islamic teachings. I came up with where was the one that I came up with? God, where is it? Oh yeah, premium Islamic studies. So there's supposed to be like funny acronyms, right? Like we have Atheist Sunday School, which is ASS. We have Friday Apocryphal Podcast, which is FAP. We have Wednesday Apocryphal Podcast, which was WAP. Yeah, the song. So like we try to do like funny acronyms for these things, right? So that's the challenge. So like yeah, we had like TIT, and then a couple others. So like that's the whole thing. So if you guys have ideas for that, please join the Discord and let us know.
Okay. You are so in the way. Why are you so in the way? I can't even move.
Cute cat demands worship. Worship kitty.
Yes. All right. Anton Gomez says, "Who's gonna be with Lawrence?"
What do you mean?
For the show,
on the show.
Quran show.
Anton Gomez was on an infidel reads the Quran. He was on my team.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah. So he's reading a Spanish translation, which would be an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does something similar already in Spanish. They go through in Nuestra Experiencia Atea, the other channel that I'm part of. He leads that with the host. Very good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just gonna be me and my co-host Ruben.
He was helpful. He was helpful on my show.
Mubarak and Bogey also could be good people to talk to.
Anyway, gotta go. Let Lawrence figure that out.
Adieu.